Jantz. You know Kevin Jantz? Kevin Jantz. He patrolled that neighborhood. He came to our trial and told the judge, like, look, y'all got the wrong two people. These ain't the individuals that did it. You good? Welcome to Exoneration Nation podcast. My name is Christopher Scott. I'm the host. And today is a very special day for all the exonerees across the world, across the country. This day we all celebrate and come together because majority of us celebrate Wrongful Conviction Day. I want to say hi to all the men and women that was wrongfully convicted. Sorry that it happened to you, and we have to do something better in our criminal justice system to make sure these kind of things doesn't happen anymore. And today on the show with me, I have a few special people. Two main people played a significant role in me getting my exoneration after serving 13 years. And we're gonna go around and let everybody introduce themselves and tell you exactly what they're doing.
I'm James Hammond with the Dallas County District Attorney's Office.
And I'm Dorothy Budd, and my daughter and I wrote the book, Tested, examining the lives of some of these men in Dallas that were wrongfully convicted and how their faith and hope helped them get out of prison.
I'm Jennifer Emily. I've been a journalist at the Dallas Morning News for 24 years, and I've written about exonerations, including Chris and Thomas's over here, and looked at the reasons behind them, and not just that they happened, but why.
I'm Robert Burns. I was a district judge, and I was the judge that was in office for 12 years and presided over the exoneration of Christopher and Claude. And I'm currently the Chief Justice of the Dallas Court of Appeals here in Dallas.
I'm Thomas McGowan. I served 23 years in the state penitentiary of Texas, and I'm just glad to be here on Wrongful Conviction Day.
Good. So basically, I'm going to pretty much start out with just saying that thank you all for being here with me today. This is a special day for all of us, and we're just going to have a basic conversation about why do we feel like wrongful convictions happen, and what do we feel like we can do to eliminate wrongful convictions, because I know one thing about it, it'll never stop, because there's things in the criminal justice system that won't allow it to stop. But we have to put the right people in the right positions to make the right decisions and to bring about a change. And the crazy part about it was when was Craig Watkins elected in?
He took office in 2007.
Craig Watkins took office in 2007. He was the first African-American district attorney in the state of Texas history. After that, he was, it was crazy that I was in prison when he got elected. And we didn't actually think that an African-American guy would be elected as the district attorney in Dallas County. And the day he was elected, it was funny, everybody kind of jumped up and hollered. You would thought we had won the prison Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And why everybody was so happy was because we knew we finally had somebody in position that understood how African American people get treated in courtrooms. And one of the first things he said was, I'm going to make a change. Right. I'm going to make a difference. And that's exactly what he did. Mr. Hammond, you was in the office when Craig Watkins got elected?
Yes.
Were you?
Yes.
So tell me, what was so important about starting the CIU, which Terry Moore actually brought it with her to Dallas County?
Yes, she brought the idea and approached Mr. Watkins with it, and he took it from there. Initially, they put the unit together. She brought in Mike Ware, and then I was chosen to be the investigator. We initially worked off of a grant, and we were able to use that money to get a lot of DNA testing done, and that's how most of our initial exonerations were done, was because of the DNA testing, and then we also saw that the DNA testing revealed how unreliable some eyewitness identifications can be, and then later we learned about the witnesses, they're very sincere in what they believe, but we didn't understand like the neurobiology of trauma at that time, which can lead to wrong identifications.
So what do you think about, like my case was a non-DNA case. Like, what's the difference between having DNA and having non-DNA, and what makes having non-DNA case harder to get them exonerated?
Well, you have to go back on non-DNA cases and just look at the evidence again. And we approach these cases disinterested, in that we really weren't looking to preserve the conviction, or we weren't looking to free the person. We were just going to follow the facts and re-interview all the witnesses and see where it led us. We were going to let the facts take us and not, have any confirmation bias where we're trying to look at things that favor a conviction and as not. And our unit took a lot of flack for that. Some police departments thought we were another internal affairs, unit looking for fault, but we weren't. We were just going to be very objective, and as we approached the cases, and the non-DNA cases, they do take much longer, but if you follow the facts and where they lead you, then I hope you can make a reasonable expectation of a good outcome.
Chris, sorry to be asking a question.
No.
Was yours not the first non-DNA
It was
exoneration?
the first
Okay,
non-DNA.
Yes.
I thought that it was. Yes.
So when my case came up in your court, was it your first exoneration ever?
Oh yeah. Judges don't preside over many exonerations.
Right.
But yeah, it was my first. Yours and Claude's were my 1st and only exonerations. I was a district judge for 12 years, and those were the only ones. And yeah, my recollection was that it was a non-DNA exoneration. And of course, as a trial judge, you're reading all the filings and you're getting updates from the lawyers. But I was not personally involved in all the stuff behind the scenes. I mean,
Right.
James and the DA's office, they did 99% of the work to make what happened happen.
Right,
They really did.
right.
I said grace over it all. I signed off on all the paperwork
Right.
and made the findings that needed to be made. The hardest thing about the whole exoneration from my standpoint was just being the face of the state of Texas and giving the apology for,
Right.
for something that obviously I felt incredibly terrible about what happened to you and Claude. But at the same time, it's weird because I didn't have any part in it.
Right.
In the bad parts,
Right.
So I'm having to apologize.
For something you didn't really have
Something I
anything to
didn't
do. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that was of the whole process. That was the hardest part for me, was just giving the
Right.
apology. But James and
Right.
Terry and Mike
Right.
and Craig Watkins, they deserve the 99% of the credit for what happened.
So, Miss Jennifer Emily, I'm coming to you. When you start first hearing about wrongful convictions and you used to come to the courtrooms, what went through your mind as seeing so many people wrongfully convicted to write about it?
The first exoneration I ever wrote about was actually Victor Thomas's in Ellis County, and I didn't know what was going on. It was a DNA exoneration, and it was one of the first, really, and I couldn't piece it together with what it meant for the system. And I met Victor that day, and then I went to a picnic that he went to the next day because it was 4th of July weekend, and what a great day to celebrate freedom for Victor. And then I started covering the courts for the morning news, and Charles Chapman got exonerated, and I was like, that's weird, what's going on? And then there was another one and another one and another one. And, I both felt so bad for the people who had wrongfully spent time in prison, but also I always look at exonerations as both the worst thing and the best thing, because it's the worst thing, obviously, people go to prison for crimes they didn't commit,
Right.
but the system is trying to right a wrong by setting people free, not that you can ever right the wrong.
Right.
And I really wanted to look at behind, what's going on with these exonerations. And Craig Watkins actually opened up the DA files after a while, and another reporter, Steve McGonigal, and I spent hours in the DA's office making copies, and then we'd have to go through them all, and we scan them all in so they'd be digital. And as Jim mentioned, a lot of it is eyewitness testimony, that people think your memory is like a camera and you can just play it back, but it doesn't work that way. And another reason is for wrongful convictions is they don't look at all the people. Right there in the file, in the DA file, you'll see the name of the person who really did it.
Right.
That someone called in with a tip, or when the detectives were out talking to people, somebody mentioned the guy's name, but they kept going for the person who was wrongfully convicted.
So would you say they had tunnel vision?
Sometimes, yes. And, you can see how it happens. And I would hope that that doesn't happen anymore, but we still treat eyewitness testimony as the gold standard.
Right.
I would hope that people look at tips a little bit differently. I hope that people look at eyewitness testimony differently. I know that in Dallas, it was Chief Kunkel at the time. The days after our story came out, several stories came out about looking at eyewitness testimony, he changed the policy so that you didn't look at 6 pictures at the same time. You looked at one after the other so you couldn't compare them.
Right.
And I know that the Richardson Police Department made big changes after Stephen Brody's exoneration. So change does happen, but I do worry, like with most things, as time passes on, we forget the lessons we learned.
Right. So Dory, up on hearing about all of these exonerees, and I remember the first day that some of us met you, we went downtown Oakland to the Barron and Bud building, and you had us in this big, office space. And it was so funny that, it was maybe 17 or 18 of us in that room, and we all got to arguing like we was in a prison day room. and you heard us arguing about it, and you was able to come in and make us feel comfortable, was able to calm us down, and just showed us what you wanted to do to bring our story more to life. So tell us about why you did that.
Chris, I had been a district attorney for Henry Wade and then had been in the crimes against children units. I'd had some familiarity with a lot of these cases were wrongful convictions were sex crimes. Yours was not, but when I started seeing these cases come out, and like you said, first there's one and you think, well, that's odd, and then all of a sudden in Dallas there's this slew of cases, and we maybe talk later why so many in Dallas came to light as opposed to some other places. I hope it's not because Dallas is inherently more unjust, but I started just watching them and being interested in them and thinking, well, back when I was in the DA's office, like you said, we thought, eyewitness testimony was the gold standard, and you have this system that's set up, and when you're getting ready to try a case, all the time you're thinking about how, if I get a conviction in this case, how can I make this be a case that'll stand up on appeal, that will, be above scrutiny? The system is set up to, once you're convicted, you stay convicted, not to have it go the opposite way. So I had this sense that, if all of a sudden case after case is coming up, then there's a real thing that's happening here. And then I started seeing some of the exonerees, because they would get some press when they came out, and I was expecting to see people that were just filled with rage. And although, of course, there is rage in being wrongfully convicted, I also saw people moving through this experience with grace and with dignity. And then I started hearing that, one option for the former exonerees when they got out would be just to say, I've given as much of my life to anybody else as I could ever give. I'm going to live for me and me alone from this day on. I'm going to have whatever fun I can have with whatever time I have left. Instead, I met these men who were taken time out of their lives to go down to the legislature to try to change the laws, to try to make sure it didn't happen to other people, to investigate cases to help other wrongfully convicted people get out. And it's been a humbling experience to get to know y'all.
So Thomas, after serving 23 years of crime for a crime you didn't commit, what brought you more joy when you first got out of prison?
Well, I think what brought me most joy is seeing my mother. That was the main thing. Because like I say, when I got locked up, I was 26, jail time. Then I went in the penitentiary at 27. Then I got out at 49, almost 50, right? So, you know, and then the whole thing about that was this. When I went in there, I never thought I'd be picking cotton or doing nothing like that, or anything like that, right? So I went straight to the fields, you know, picking cotton, doing all that type of stuff like that, right? And so as time goes on, right, down there doing all them old penitentiary things, it was just a straight nightmare to me, right?
Right.
And so then, you know, I kept bucking, you know, because I knew I was, you know, I wasn't supposed to be here, right? But they try to, you know, eventually they try to break my spirit, you know. So I quit bucking, went on out there to the fields, did all that type of stuff like that, stayed there a long time, right? Because I'm going through that stuff like that. I mean, I'm watching the movie with Hurricane Carter, and he was saying, Hurricane with Denzel Washington in it.
Right.
And he said, I don't want to be in a penitentiary if I turn 50, right? And I'm just sitting up there thinking, I'm about to turn 50. But another thing I said was this, right? I said, God, you know, I just said one day myself, I said, God, look, man, I don't want to be in a penitentiary. I don't want to die in the penitentiary. I don't want my mother to go to a grave thinking her son was a rapist or did any of this type of stuff. I said, God, you get me out the penitentiary, I would tell people the goodness you've done for me. Say about 2 or 3 months later, I'm walking down the highway and stuff like this, and I get a letter, because I've been writing the Innocent Project of New York for a minute. And so I hadn't heard from him a long time. Next thing I know, I get a letter saying, Mr. McGowan, it's a DA, he say Watkins. It's a judge in Dallas County that deals with the exonerated cases named Watkins, Judge Watkins. He said, even if he don't, we still gonna get you down there because we still got some blood left from the DNA. So I started thinking, and I prayed that prayer. So anyways, I'm getting ready to go, right? It was a dude right there, another inmate say, man, I wish you luck. I'm like, man, how do you know all that? Anyway, so then first I was just thinking, man, I say that prayer, and then here I am. Right. I say, you know, I just want my mother go to a great thing, the son done like that. Then I don't want to die in the penitentiary. You know, that's the main thing. And then dying of the rapists and all that type of stuff. But anyway, though, as time goes on, right, they get me back in Dallas County, right? And I said, man, I can't believe this. I get in Dallas County, that's how I ran across Jim Hammond. And they said, well, we finna, they called out of my cell, told me they're gonna give me a DNA test, right? Went down there, then Mr. Hammond right there, I didn't know him then, because everybody got older then, probably wouldn't have known him then. But anyway, he said, Thomas, you don't remember me? I said, no. He said, I work with Detective Carter back there on the case. I said, oh man, this ain't gonna turn out right. And so then I went back to my cell, he took my DNA swab test me, went back to my cell. Next thing I know, I heard that, Mr. Gowan, you're getting out, they find out you didn't do it. So first thing I did, I got out, they took me to Mr. Watkins' office. I mean, not Mr. Watkins, Watkins. And then next thing I know, I met the detective and the girl who accused me of the crime. And they asked me, they said, how you feel about that? They showed me some pictures of a guy they said kind of looked like me and all like that. They say, see, Thomas kind of look like you, right? I wouldn't say, nah. But then again, I thought that guy brought me face to face with my accusers, right? And I just looked at him and I just said, I couldn't feel bad about nothing because I was like, he brought me face to face with him. And then later on, as we did some talking engagements all like that, but it faded out. But then later on, I get a letter from the Austin, Texas. They said, we got a CODIS hit. So they said, we find the guy who did the crime. We finna go down there and talk to him. I said, God made it good. So even if they still think I didn't do it, no man ain't mine, he made it let it know he did not do it. They went back down there and talked to the guy in the penitentiary. They asked him how he feel about me doing the time for him. He said he was sorry for it. And he apologized for it, but then again, I just thought how good God is.
Right.
He got me out, and here I am today. I see my mother straight, and then Emily, doing them stories about exoneration. Dorothy Wood did that book with her. And
Small world.
Yeah, small world. So
yeah.
So I just thank God every day, and that I'm free, and thank you for letting me come on the show. And it's happy, Wrongful Conviction Day.
While I always bring you aboard because I think I was out maybe 2 months, and I met Thomas McGowan at an exoneree meeting, and he was the first person that ever gave me anything when I got out of prison. Went to the meeting, sit down, and Thomas McGowan gave me $500 worth of 20s. And I was like, wow, I haven't seen this kind of money in a long time. So I was like, wow, you know, it was a big deal to me, but he let me know that, hey, I've been where you've been. I've been taken care of. But we want y'all to have the thing that y'all supposed to have, and if this can help, I want this to help you. So since then, me and Thomas McGowan, we've been friends. You should see us texting back and forth about the Dallas Cowboys, the Texas Rangers. It's every day the teams playing. Me and Thomas is texting each other back and forth about the games. Yep. And the best part about that is we are free, and we're doing it being free. We don't have to go to the prison day room and watch the sports on TV. We can actually watch it at home and text each other and let each other know, like, you know, we here for each other. Even if it's in the smallest bit of way, we're here for each other. You know, that's what makes Wrongful Conviction Day one of the best days, because you get to share with people like this. Judge Burns, I want to ask you a question about discovery.
Okay.
What role does discovery plays in a person getting a fair trial?
Well, discovery, you know, it's the Michael Morton Act. It's named after the famous exoneree from Central Texas. But discovery is huge now. You know, when I was a DA, I was a prosecutor starting in '91 in Dallas, and there was no discovery back then, very limited discovery. And, you know, prosecutor, if they wanted, could really do a lot of things during the trial to make it very difficult for a defendant to get a fair trial. I mean, it was trial by ambush, basically, in the early 90s, or until the Michael Morton Act was passed, 80s and 90s, when all these wrongful convictions happened.
Right.
But it's huge to have discovery, and it's an enormous improvement on the system, and it gives criminal defendants a fighting chance, especially if they have an effective lawyer. If I could follow up on something that Jennifer said a minute ago about changes in the system since the exonerations have happened. Well, I think one change that at least from my perspective, having been a trial judge for quite a while, is that I think jurors are a lot better now about understanding that wrongful convictions happen, because, you know, it got an enormous amount of media coverage on these exonerations, and I think jurors do go into the courtroom a little bit more skeptical than they were. You know, in the 80s and 90s, I think jurors thought, oh, if the police says it happened, and the DA, you know, look at that DA, what a young, handsome-looking fellow. He's saying the guy's guilty. I think jurors were a lot more naive back then.
Me too.
And I think now they have a little bit more of a critical eye.
They're also more diverse.
That's true too.
You're not very often having all white jurors.
Right.
There are people of color present.
Right.
That's true.
And you know, that's one of the crazy parts about my trial. Like, when I was picking my jury panel, this is when I really realized people don't like serving on jury panels. I had a African lady get up and said, like, Your Honor, I can't be on this jury panel. And she said, why? And the lady said, well, me and Mr. Scott used to date, but I had never ever seen this lady a day in my life. Never seen a day in my life. And it was funny, my girlfriend was sitting behind me. So I had to tell her, like, I do not know this woman. We did not used to date. And she was like, yeah, okay. I'm like, look.
You were wrongfully convicted twice.
For real. And I'm like, I do not know this lady. And, you know, she gave me that look like, okay, this is something that we're going to have to talk about. Because this woman saying y'all used to date, and that what really opened my eyes to be like, people do not like serving on jury panels. And when I knew I was going to get an all-white jury panel, this no lie, we had 3 different jury panels that come in and said, we cannot find Mr. Scott guilty for a crime he did, for this crime, because there's no physical evidence. There's no DNA, there's no murder weapon, And really the ID is kind of faulty because the lady didn't identify me. The cop walked the lady up to the window and said, "This is the man that killed your husband." It wasn't a statement. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And in that courtroom, it was crazy. After three jury selections couldn't be chosen, the fourth one came in, and one African American guy stood up and said, "I can find Mr. Scott guilty just on her word alone." 5 minutes later, I had an all-white jury panel, and I'm like, he's saying he can find me guilty. Why isn't he on the jury panel? But you really just want to see some people, you know, some African American people. You want to see this this jury panel, you know, diverse, to be a diverse crowd. But it a lot of time it wasn't. Back in the day, it was always an all-white jury panel. Always. And I was like, this is not going to go well for me. I already knew that I was going to be found guilty, but what I didn't want was to go to death row. And the judge kind of did me a favor, and she said, "Well, tell me why I shouldn't give you the death penalty case." And I was like, "How could you kill an innocent man?" She said, "You just saved your own life today. We're not going to kill you, but we're going to give you a capital life sentence." This was a judge. And I was like, why would you say that in front of the presence of the jury? You are already telling the jury that I'm guilty, or you feel like I'm guilty. Why would you say that? But it was pretty crazy to me about that, and the way the jury selections be chosen. And I think, like, we got to, like Judge Burton said, he feel like it's getting better. He feel like it's being a more diverse crowd or whatever, and that's good because that's what we need. And they always say it's one person, maybe two in there that may feel like you're guilty. I mean, that you're innocent. So hopefully, they'll be the one to make the difference of, the outcome of this case. Mr. Hammond, like, sitting outside, I know you on the way back, you was telling me that where you said that y'all went to Houston and what D-Mike was.
Right.
You had to, do some surveillance on his home.
Well, we had somebody do that. We went to some of D-Mike's friends, like immediately after the crime. He went over to a friend's house over by Love Field,
Right.
and put all the money out there and said that he had to do something he didn't really like doing, and she had never been interviewed in your case, but she was known about. And
You talking about Cookie?
no, not Cookie. Cookie is the one that she was not allowed to testify in your
Right,
trial
right.
because D-Mike had stolen her gun to use in the crime,
Right.
and then he had thrown it in the river after the crime. And we had Cookie ready, and she had, after all those years, her story was still the same.
Right.
And then this other witness we had talked to, she had never been talked to, but she was available if people had just explored it more. And I treasure my time on the Conviction Integrity Unit because some of these cases, police officers, investigators did not carry through what they should have done. And your first obligation as a police officer, and I've been in this business a long time now, that you have to get justice for your victim. And if you're pursuing the wrong person, they're not getting justice. And the most glaring example is Stephen Phillips' case, where the real guy, Sidney Goodyear, had been identified in one of the other cities where he had committed a crime here in the Dallas area. And actually a warrant had been generated, yet when the police department that filed on Stephen talked to this other agency, they dropped that case. And so I asked the investigator who was still with that agency at the time, I said, well, why didn't you pursue Goodyear when he had been identified? He matched the description, had blue eyes, had a German Luger. Stephen didn't have any of that stuff. And he said, well, we didn't know where he was. I said, well, where he was, I said, he Goodyear left here and went out to California and committed 30 other offenses.
Wow.
And, you know, so all those other people and their families were victimized because it wasn't pursued, and I just aggravated me. You know?
I know a few years ago, Dory took us to Jamaica, you know, to, hey, you know, it was so exciting to be on a private plane. I'd never been on a private jet before. And Dory was nice enough to take us to Jamaica. And tell us why you just wanted to take us to Jamaica and let us have fun at your residence.
You know, I just felt like getting to know you all. I did not expect the kind of brotherhood and loyalty and lifting each other up that I met between these men. I mean, that's the first time I heard that story of Thomas, you know, giving you some cash when you got out. I knew that there was injustices in the system. I mean, I think everybody knows that sometimes the system doesn't work right. But, you know, little quirks like, you know, if you get out of prison in the normal way, you at least get a suit of clothes and a bus ticket and $200.
Right.
If you get out from being wrongfully convicted, you got nothing. And if you've been in prison for a long time, that's the part of the story that really surprised me. But I started getting to know and interview the men was, you know, the huge challenge of putting your life back together when you have had it on pause for that long. I mean, people like Thomas or people like Johnny Lindsay who spent, you know, decades in prison coming out and, you know, not knowing what to do with a credit card, a cell phone, you know, relationships that had been important when they went in, those are all shattered or tattered by the time you come out. And to try to rebuild that, I think part of what you all had to do is build a family among each other. And I was just so happy to have you all have let me in spite of the fact that when I first met you and I walked in and said, hi, I'm a former sex crimes prosecutor and I would like to get to know y'all. Y'all told me to get out of the room. But we worked through it, and getting to know you all, you're just an honored part of my life. And so to see you all get to do some things that maybe you wouldn't normally do and spend time together relaxing when you had to spend so much time in a hard way was something I wanted to be part of.
It was so nice to actually fly to Jamaica and not going through customs, having to be going through customs for 2 and 3 hours or whatever. And
how long it took y'all to get there?
It didn't take long at all. It didn't take long at all. But you know, the really great part about that was we have dinner on the lawn, and a Jamaican reggae band came and played for it while we were sitting down to eat. I mean, it was something that, you know, majority of us would never, ever experienced sometime if we didn't go through what we went through. You know, I don't want to say it's good going through wrongful conviction and whatever the case may be, but getting out of prison being wrongfully convicted was a blessing.
Sure was a blessing.
But building the friendships with the people when you get out is a bigger blessing, because some of the people that I built relationships with while I was out of prison is right here, right now. And these are the same people that was there for me when, you know, didn't nobody want to listen to me.
See that?
Mr. Hammond came and got me out of prison, and I was kind of mad about it because they came and got me in September, and my trial went to October.
Right.
So I was like, can you just leave me in prison until October, then come back and get me? Because I knew how hectic it was going to be. Being from in prison, you're kind of free in a sense, but in county jail, you stuck in, you know, in one little confined cell.
Yep.
And I was like, no, just come back and get me. And they're like, no, it doesn't work that way. We got to take you back now. But on the way going home, I always tell the story going to Dallas County. I was thinking about this hamburger I used to see on TV all the time. And I think it was an Angus burger or something. And Mr. Hammond was like, you want a hamburger? I'm like, yeah, I want a hamburger. He said, well, we're going to take you and get you a hamburger. And we going through Whataburger. I think we went to Whataburger. And the people was looking like, what is he doing? Why is he getting a hamburger and he handcuffed and all of that? They kind of amazed that I'm back there and these individuals finna feed me, some
Free
real
will,
food.
yeah,
And
free
I'm
will
like,
food.
I got to tell you, like, I was wrongfully convicted of a crime I didn't commit. And this guy is nice enough to give me a hamburger and I want to sit here and enjoy this hamburger that I hadn't had in over
Man.
13 years. So just meeting meeting the individuals that played a significant role in us getting out and still being a part of that, being a part of their circle is amazing. And Jennifer, you have two beautiful twins. Tell me, what's going on with them. And you told us to share the story with us about them talking about wrongful conviction. Why don't you share that with us?
I have twin daughters. They're 10 years old in the 5th grade. And when they were much younger, maybe 4 or 5, they were playing with their toys, and they had said that I was trying to figure out what they were doing, and someone was in jail. And I was like, oh, what did they do? And they was like, oh, they say that he did this. I was like, oh, that's not good. And then they told me, well, he didn't do it. So that's really bad that he's in jail. And I was like, that is really bad. And I don't know how they really picked it up. Probably from me talking about your all's
Right.
cases, and they just absorb it and start
See that?
playing. I don't even know that they remembered it, but to me, I hope it's something that sticks with them, that idea that just because someone is accused, it doesn't mean they did it.
That's
Right.
right.
I know, like, every time my grandson, I always say he watched the True Conviction documentary. And he always say, he called me Papa. He like, Papa, it was so wrong that they did you like that. He said, you know what? I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be an attorney. And I'm going to work for an organization like the one that you have. He was like, hey, when I get out of college and pass the bar, would you allow me to work with your organization? I'm like, sure. We just make it a family business. Just come on, make sure you doing it for the right reason. Don't do it because you feel like it's one reason you want to, do this kind of work. Make it be a multitude of things that you want to be able to do and accomplish while you're going to school, not just focusing on one thing, focus on a number of things that you should be doing with the criminal justice system. And Judge Burns, you said, you're not a county judge anymore. What are you now?
Yeah, I'm an appellate judge. My title is Chief Justice of the Fifth Court of Appeals. So I'm now presiding over the court that wrongfully affirmed your conviction and Claude's conviction. And I think I mentioned to you this before, that I went back as your case was going through the system. I went back and read the appeals in yours and Claude's case, and the lawyer in Claude's case really did an excellent job of preserving error. But the court that I sit on now just swatted away all those points of error and affirmed his conviction.
Wow.
And he, at least on the appeal, I think Claude should have gotten a new trial, but he didn't, of course.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I do now, and it's very different from being a trial judge. This is all reading and writing and reading clerks' records and briefs and reporters' records, and it's not at all like being a trial judge. I don't go in the courtroom very often, whereas a trial judge, you're in there every day, hours a day. So that's what I do now, and it's a different analysis. We don't. At the Court of Appeals, we don't even, I was thinking about this when I was driving over here, it's like, we don't, innocence, we don't even look at that on our criminal cases. About a third of our business is criminal, but that's not really something that we look at. It's just, was there some kind of legal error in the trial below? It's the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas that actually takes up the issue of innocence on a post-conviction writ. That's not something that I deal with at all anymore.
Right. So, Thomas, when you first got out, what was the first thing that you wanted to do?
Eat me a Salisbury steak dinner, and they took me out, right, to a place called Gators, right? Everybody was around. I didn't even know if you probably was there. I don't know. Anyway, though, they took me around. They took me downtown, and then I ordered that chicken fried steak, the mashed potatoes, and green beans. That was pretty rough for me in that age, too. That's what I wanted to do, and I got it.
I think what I wanted to do first was, I just wanted to sit in the bubble bath tub.
You know?
I wanted, because you showered for 13. You did 23. I
Yeah.
did 13. I showered amongst 100 other men for 13 years straight every day, and I just wanted the solitude of being able
Tell
to
you.
run a hot bubble bath and just sit there and think about nothing, just soak in the tub. You know that thing like Calgon, take me away.
They can't
That's exactly what I wanted it to do. I wanted that moment
Without nobody
to
turning
do-
out the water.
without nobody telling you it's hitting the key on the cell
the
saying
water off and all
it's
that.
time to get out.
Yeah.
Or if you don't get out, we're gonna turn the hot water all the way up. Like seriously.
messed up,
So
man.
those are the things that I cherish the most, because when your life is kind of dictated
Tell you.
every minute, every hour, every second of the day, you want that kind of freedom.
That's right.
And one of the most important things to me, I get a chance to walk out to my mailbox and get my own mail. See, in prison, the key to get your mail is your identification number.
Yeah.
When they walk up and say, Christopher Scott, you have mail, I got to tell them my TDC number, 806422. I
Still
never
remember
forget
mine,
it.
too.
And now only thing I got to do is one thing about freedom. If you can open up a door from one side of that door, that means you're free. But being in prison, you only hear doors slam and shut.
it.
So you appreciate being able to stick a key in your door, open it up, or whatever the case may be.
And just like you said about that shower, they both about like me. I've been there taking a shower a long time, girl. You been a long time. I've been there a long time later, because I already remember. Man, I can take a shower as long as I want to now, without nobody coming there. Get out the shower, turn the stuff off, and just cutting you short. It's just freedom, just walking out your door. You turn the TV, you leave TV on, watch ESPN all night.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You ain't got to worry about nobody getting mad, about, we want to watch a movie, we want to watch some other old stuff. I would say, man, I'm watching this. You ain't got to
Right.
worry about that no more,
Right.
no voting, ain't none
Right.
of that fighting. And that,
Right.
so it's just freedom, you know what I'm saying?
So those are things that we had to go through. Say, when I first got to prison, it was only one TV
Yeah.
per thing.
I'm telling you.
So they brought 2 TVs in
Sports.
now. And the crazy part about it is, in prison, people may think, I'm lying to them or whatever. It's 3 things that's mandatory: sports, the news, and soap operas. And that's how I actually got back into
You're killing
watching
me
soap
soap
operas. I
operas.
watched soap operas with my mom growing up as a
Me
kid.
too.
But after I moved on my own, I continued to watch, because it was crazy. My ex-girlfriend used to say, "You really watch General Hospital
wrestling.
every day. You will not miss it." I'd get my work schedule time where I can watch General Hospital, soap opera. So when I went to prison
Gangster too.
and saw like the toughest of the toughest
Yeah.
guys watch soap opera.
Younger than the rest of all
So
that.
yeah, so you know that you don't have anything to worry about, and it was so funny that you like, these guys are killers.
Can't touch the
These
TV
guys
when it's
will know how to fight really good in prison, but there's one thing about it: if you interrupt those soap operas, you have a problem. Like they say, Houston, you have a problem. Prison, you have a
Yeah.
problem. And I'm gonna ask y'all this question: what is the wildest prison stories have you ever heard? You can start anywhere.
Jim probably knows. He's probably heard a lot more than me. I don't know any good prison stories.
Anybody?
I know. When you were talking earlier about the guy that we went and interviewed that actually committed the crime, I remember when I told you what he said, that he apologized, that he was
Right.
sorry that you did his time. I remember your reply was, "Yeah, I bet he is."
You see that? I'm telling you, man.
I've heard a lot over the years. This is not wild, but the way the things people do to cook in prison,
Oh,
to make
yeah.
alcohol,
Right.
to make tater tots with
Right.
a hair dryer.
Right.
But really, if I think about it, the wildest thing I've heard is happened recently, and you and I were texting about it when Billy Chimere was murdered.
Right.
Because they were on lockdown
Right.
because of contraband,
Right.
and he gets killed, they say, by his own cellmate.
Right.
And you said that that's a darker area of the prison
Right.
that people don't really go to, guards
Right.
don't go to very
Right.
often, so it took them a while to find it.
Right.
And, Billy Chimere was convicted of 2 murders, but is,
Right.
suspected in dozens. So
Right.
it was, when I heard that first, I was like, it took me a second. It took a second for it to register because it's not something that you really expect.
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking. I don't think about Billy Chimere.
Right. I know you've been around us a long time, so I know you got.
I've heard some stories, but I think in a weird way, the wildest story isn't a particular story about prison, but just you grow up in a time in the United States where we kind of say we're the most powerful country, we have the best system, democracy's perfect, we have this jury system. You watch the movies growing up that kind of idealize what a great system it is, and it is a great system. But at the same time, one of the wildest prison stories to me is, if there's 30 men in Dallas that have been able to prove they've been wrongfully convicted, and it's in a little slice of cases that kind of became able to be proved because the intersection between science and some of the politics that were going on in the justice system. If there's 30 of those men, there's multiples of that in Dallas and in every other city and around the world where, maybe there's not quite as much to celebrate about wrongful conviction day because there's still a lot of people in prison whose voices are not being heard.
That's the exact point I wanted to bring up, because you mentioned that kind of earlier about how why did we have so many exonerations out of Dallas? And my understanding is it was sort of a fluke that when they built Swifts that they had a big evidence room, and so they just kept filling up the evidence room and they never destroyed it, and so it was there. Whereas some of the other counties around the state, like Harris County, it's like, after the case went through all the appellate process and was final, that they didn't have room for evidence and they would get rid of it. So, on today being exoneration day or whatever, I think we ought to think for a minute about all the people who
still left behind.
They're left behind. And there's no way they can prove they're innocent, but they really, really, truly are in fact innocent of what they got convicted of, and just by a fluke, their evidence was destroyed or lost or whatever, and they're stuck.
I know, like Craig Watkins had stated that when he first was elected, they wanted him to destroy all the evidence. And he said that was one of the red flags that was raised, that when you first come in, why would they want you to destroy all the evidence that could prove people innocence? Yeah. And right then he said he started focusing on, okay, so if they saying this, then something is actually wrong with the system, because they want me to throw away things that's going to prove people innocent. And that's when he said there was going to be some changes made. And he stated that if you think you have DNA remaining in your case, write the DA office, and I'll make sure that we actually look into it and see if we can help you or not. But me sitting in prison and everybody was talking about DNA cases. And I was like, well, what about the non-DNA people? What can we do to get exonerated? And it was frustrating because every innocent project that I wrote was saying you don't have DNA, it's nothing we can do for you. So now I'm so mad. I want to go and write every innocent project a cuss word letter saying like, hey, open up your heart, open up your mind, open up your eyes. It's people in prison that don't have DNA that's innocent. What are you gonna do about it? Come on now. And when Craig Watkins got elected, I saw a person that had compassion about others' lives, and that maybe he can make a change about people that doesn't have non-DNA in their case. And when my case came up, I couldn't believe it because everybody gave me 1,000,001 chance. And when the people from University of Texas in Arlington came to see me, and I was like, I can't believe, that y'all want me. Actually, to confess to this crime. They wanted me to confess. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to confess to a crime that I didn't commit.
That's right.
And they were like, well, Claude has been in prison long enough. It's time for you to say, do the right thing and let him go. I'm like, Claude been in there long, so have I. So what makes Claude any different than me? Because I didn't commit this crime. And when it came back that, you have to take a polygraph test, I was like, I asked for a polygraph 13 years ago, and y'all refused to give it to me. And my attorney told me, and this is why we got to choose and pick better public defenders or better court-appointed attorneys that's going to work on cases, that's going to have some compassion about life, because he was like, I'm not going to give you a polygraph test because maybe you're a felon. And I'm like, I'm not sitting up here pleading my heart out to you if I'm guilty. I don't think that's something a guilty person would do. And it's crazy, when he told me that right then and there, I felt like he actually thought that I had something to do with the case or I knew about the case. And it's crazy, and I'm going to shoot this question at you, Judge Bird. I wrote my judge and like, look, I don't think this attorney is good for me, because my attorney give me the feeling that he actually believed I committed this crime or I had something to do with it. And when I wrote her the letter, she ended up reading the letter out loud in the courtroom in front of my attorney, and I'm like, oh, I'm screwed now. you reading a letter that I wrote to you, thinking it was in confidence that you wasn't gonna share it, but you did. So when you was a county judge, if somebody would have wrote you a letter like that, what would be your perception of that?
Well, obviously, as a judge, you're going to read those letters, and they come on a somewhat, or a not infrequent basis. And so you try to look at the letters and see if there's some, valid concerns about whether the lawyer's doing a good job or not. The last case that I tried as a judge, before I came to the Court of Appeals, there was a lot of complaining by that defendant. And I knew the trial lawyer to be a competent lawyer, but what I did was actually appoint him a second lawyer. It was a mini cap like your case, but I appointed that guy a second lawyer, and I think that helped kind of smooth things over. But some lawyers take their job more seriously than others, unfortunately, and it's. I wish I could appoint Racehorse Haynes on every case, but there's only so many outstanding lawyers, and there's a finite number of really good lawyers out there. And
I think that also shows where different systems of injustice are intersecting. I mean, there's racial injustice. There's also economic injustice.
Yes.
We can put in laws to say we're going to make the discovery system more transparent, or we're going to put in things to make lineups better. But at the same time, if you don't have money to hire a lawyer who has the time to put in to utilize that discovery, to call those kinds of lineups into question, or just to do the things, go out and interview witnesses that aren't the first layer of witnesses you see when you open the file, then it's hard for them to discover if the police have made a mistake and are falsely accusing someone if they don't have the resources to do it.
That's right.
We had talked about the evidence in Dallas County, and I don't know if it's lore or not, but supposedly the evidence was kept because Henry Wade ordered it so, but he wanted to keep it so he could prove people's conviction.
Wow.
But the opposite ended up happening.
Right.
And so around the country and throughout the state, people look at Dallas County and say, well, you guys have a ton of wrongful convictions. We don't have any, or we've had one. But it's because Dallas County kept the evidence and then eventually did the right thing. And if other counties had done the same, we would probably have a lot more exonerations. And I think people need to realize that wrongful convictions are still happening, that we haven't changed the system so much that it can't happen. It does happen. And I can't point to a specific case, that guy, he shouldn't have been convicted, but statistically speaking, they're still happening. There are people who've been in prison for decades who just either, they don't have anyone to listen to them, or they don't have a district attorney who will seriously look at their case.
Right.
I know Mike Ware thought that his view was that there's DNA to test, let's test it. That was brought into clarity with Patrick Waller's case. Patrick Waller filed for DNA testing back in 2001 when the statute first came into effect, but it was denied. It was fought by the office and it was denied, and let's test it. Well, we tested it and Patrick Waller was exonerated, and had they granted the testing back in 2001, the statute of limitations had not run, we could have prosecuted the real people.
Wow.
And because of that we couldn't. Now that led to our office petitioning for the new law of the DNA-supported suspected offender file, where if there's DNA, we can get that information added to a person's criminal history as an addendum, not as a conviction, but as an addendum, and then that can be used in future crimes in punishment to show a previous bad act. And you could even have the original victim and even the exoneree come testify saying, yeah, I didn't do this. DNA shows this guy did.
And Patrick wasn't the only one who was denied. There are a ton
Michael
of
Morton.
people.
Well, Michael Morton really got messed over
Right.
by the system, and he's probably served 7 or 8 years, extra years, because the DA in Williamson County, I think it was, fought tooth and nail in the Court of Criminal Appeals to deny him DNA testing.
One of the guys, Lamondo Simmons and Baron Bell. Baron Bell, we made him on DNA as doing the actual perpetrators, and then and so after it was on the news with Patrick getting his exoneration, I get a call. I'm at home on the weekend, and it's Baron Bell, the guy that DNA, and he says, yeah, I said, I tried to help you guys out. I'm thinking, well, no, you didn't, but it's been on TV now, and my mother saw the TV news coverage, and now that she's mad at me, and that's not fair. And I said, Baron, he went by Byron, but his real name is Baron. I said, wait a minute, you abducted this couple from the West End. You took them to a house first you took them to a bank where you made them withdraw money. Then you took them to a house where you sexually assaulted them. And the only thing that happened to you is your mother's mad at you. I mean, he just was lost on that.
Wasn't one of those guys later
Right.
convicted of something
Crazy,
else? Am I thinking of a
Lamondo
different case?
Simmons,
Lamondo Simmons.
he was later convicted of aggravated assault on his uncle who loaned him the gun to do the original offense. And then just a few years ago, I was watching the news when it talked about this man being killed outside of a check cashing place, and it was Lamondo Simmons, where he was robbed and then killed. And I'm thinking, I wonder what he thought at that moment where he was the victim now,
Right.
So.
Crazy.
That's crazy. So I have 2 more questions, and we'll call it a day. I'd want everybody to answer this question in about a minute, tops if you can. Say, for instance, you're a judge. A cop walks into the courtroom and tells y'all had the wrong 2 people. My staff and my informants tell me that these are the 2 individuals that's actually committed this crime. If you was a judge, what would you do at that particular time?
Are you in the middle of a trial?
Yes.
Yeah. I think you stop the trial at least for the moment and talk to the officer to find out what's going on, why he thinks that, and maybe eventually, if there's something to it, maybe you declare a mistrial. But you're the actual judge.
That's the correct answer. Or at least
I
from
should have
my-
gone to law
You should
school.
have gone to law school. Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the answer. Is one thing I saw again and again when I started looking at these different cases is that everyone had a different fact pattern, but there was this sense as the investigations went forward that they got a person in their sights that they thought was the person. Mostly, I think, honestly thought that as it started, and maybe the police even thought it all the way through. But there was a sense these cases started taking on a life of their own. They just started. It was like a ball rolling down the hill too fast,
Right.
and I think it can take a judge, a jury member, various people in the system can say, "Stop! Wait a minute. Let's look at this." Has there been some kind of a rush to judgment here? And I think figuring out having places in the system where the brakes get put on every now and then to back up and look is really important.
I agree. I agree.
Okay.
Well, me, personally speaking, I'm in time, me and Detective Corley and a girl, right, and the woman, like, we was doing a talking event. And I'm in time, Carly got up there, and Carly said, well, yes, we did go to Mr. McGowan's cell, and we did take the blood from him. And as we took the blood from him, we did go back to the judge. Anyways, he said something, and then he said, the judge said, well, you don't think we just have enough evidence here, right? Or something like that. And then he said that. So I was thinking, man, if the judge said they didn't have enough evidence, then that should have been right then and there I wasn't the one, right? Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, if the judge probably would just push that incident and say, what about that case with Mr. McGowan, which I got up on that, right? But back then, I remember I was looking at the newspaper, I was locked up in the jail, and I was reading about Henry Wade. Henry Wade said, we convict them on the front page, then they overturn it on the back page. So they let me know that they'll send you to the penitentiary, and you get down there, you work on your case, then you'll get out. But in other words, you finna get railroaded, you finna go to the penitentiary. That's simple as that. And so I said to myself, man, that's a cold lick there, man, because if you knew that, hey, you know, it wasn't enough evidence there, and the judge told you that, try the case? You know, they're not gonna judge it, come back and say, what about the case about Mr. McGowan? But at that time, how they was doing stuff in them early 80s, it was all about sending you to the penitentiary, you know, so it was just hard lick right there. So yeah, it can be, you know, the judge, it can, you know.
Right. Last question, if there was anything that y'all could change about our criminal justice system, now, I know one is not enough, but I'm gonna give y'all one. What would it be, Jennifer?
I would pay people more for jury duty, and I know we just increased the amount, but that what they increased it to is not enough for people who don't get paid when they're at jury duty. They lose so much. Not everyone can afford to take a day off work. Most people can't afford to take a day off work. If we did that, our juries would be more diverse, and we would have, you know, better options. And you know, I was actually on a jury a couple years ago, and there was a black man sitting next to me, and they did a shuffle, and so I became number 2 and he was number 1, and he had his head between his legs and he was panicking at the thought, and I was trying to assure him, you know, stay, you know, you can do this, because we need people like you on the jury. We don't need me. Right. And he just said he couldn't judge another person, but paying jurors more, I mean, it changes the system.
I think one thing that would help a lot is to make sure that public defenders or court-appointed lawyers have a caseload that's reasonable so they have time to investigate cases, and have a budget so they can actually do meaningful investigation, so that when the system has gotten off course, they can have a chance at least to see where there might be something they can do to interject some reality back into the system.
Right. Mr. Young?
Well, from the standpoint of law enforcement in the criminal justice system, I think the education at the incipient levels of learning, and police academies, criminal justice programs in colleges and universities teach the subject of wrongful conviction, so that they'll go into their profession knowing that these things can happen and be prepared for it.
I'm just praying for change, you know, because I believe, you know, like you say, with wrongful conviction being more aware now, and students that's coming into the profession now, they're going to take a little bit more better look, even with the young judges coming up, and just, you know, just generally overall, because they know now that you can get wrongfully convicted, you know. And so, you know, that's just all. I'm just praying for change. I believe it's going to come too.
Dory mentioned training public defenders better, so I'll pick on prosecutors for a minute and say that, you know, I think a lot of prosecutors, young prosecutors, don't realize that the police can and do make mistakes. And I had my eyes open as a young felony prosecutor about a really bad mistake that an investigator made on a burglary case, and the defendant had a couple paragraphs on his indictment, so he's looking at a lot of time. And when I went out to the scene and saw the physical evidence, it was very obvious to me that the person absolutely did not commit this offense. It was a really eye-opening experience for me as a prosecutor. But But prosecutors, I think, need, especially, you know, I think probably in Dallas and the big cities, they get a lot of training about how wrongful convictions happen. I'm not so sure that they do in the smaller counties in Texas, and I really think that prosecutors in Texas could be better trained about how to fairly investigate and fairly prosecute cases.
Yeah, because I want to iterate. It wasn't a judge; it was a prosecutor that Carly took the thing to, right? The evidence, right? So yeah, so just like he said, judge said, prosecutors, you know, train better, understanding what it is, and just don't, you know, the police do bring something to you, just don't be like, okay, we don't go and convict them. Be like, no, we need more evidence, you know.
Right.
So prosecutors do need to be, you know, just like
Right.
Judge Wright said.
Mine is, I always go back to the jury panel
Chill.
and tell people, like, you know, don't be afraid or don't run from being on the jury panel, because you got to understand, just your one vote alone can stop an innocent man from going to prison, or worse yet, going to
Captain
death
Murder.
row.
Dang, death row.
In my case, I had a capital murder case. I could have easily been on death row,
Thank
but
God,
glad the
man.
judge gave me opportunity
Tell you.
to choose my fate. Why shouldn't she seek the death penalty?
It's
So-
hard one there.
It was amazing to have you all on my show today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it, and it was great, you know, sharing Wrongful Conviction Day with y'all for
That's
the
right.
first part
Wrongful
of it.
Conviction Day.
And I'm sure I have y'all on again on my show again, and it was a pleasure. That's today's episode of Wrongful Conviction Nation, and hopefully y'all will come back next time and watch us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
everybody.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you all.
It's always good to see you, Angel.